Hello and welcome to a very special Play Disc, the musical analysis podcast in which my brother and I take deep dives into full albums. I'm Jon Porrabill.
And I'm Harrison Porrabill.
And today is a special day because we are, for the first time in our show's short history, covering an album that was requested by a listener.
Yeah, and even better, neither of us have even heard this one before.
Yeah, that's an added bonus for sure. The listener is my friend Billy Callis, who is one half of the Austin, Texas electronic industrial band Nail House. And the album he requested was King Crimson and their 1969 debut, the seminal progressive rock album In the Court of the Crimson King.
What? Why?
I felt like putting a little English on it. Oh,
okay.
No pun intended. Billy was able to achieve this feat by submitting a request to our request lottery. If you want a shot at that, just go ahead and visit our Patreon account at patreon.com/playdiscpodcast. A donation at any level will get you an entry into our request lottery, which will be assigned a number between 1 and 99. And at the end of every episode, we roll dice to see if we pick an album from the request lottery. Disclaimer, we're not rolling the dice this time.
Yeah, unfortunately for our listeners in the request lottery, we've got a bit of a scheduled event for our next episode.
Yeah, we have a time-sensitive cross-promotion. We'll tell you more about it at the end. But for right now, we're going to talk about King Crimson. And Harrison, I just have one question with which to begin this discussion. Should any one man, in fact, have all that power?
No, never.
Never.
Mm-mm.
So just so we're clear, what you're saying to me is no one man should have all that power.
Nope.
I am, of course, alluding to the fact that Kanye West famously sampled the first song on this album, 21st Century Schizoid Man, for his single Power.
So, it's really weird, because I knew that was a sample, and I knew it was a sample from some guy called King Crimson. And I never sought out the original song because, honestly, anytime I seek out a song that, like, Kanye West sampled, it turns out he has modified it such that, like, what I like about it in the sample isn't even there in the original a lot of the time. And
yeah.
I never sought out 21st Century Schizoid Man because it is so distorted and noisy that I just kind of figured, like, that Kanye must have absolutely destroyed that in processing and sampling. But no, it turns out it just sounds like that.
Yep. You had that same question because you had bought a new Bluetooth speaker and you were like, oh, this speaker is terrible. Oh, no, the album just sounds that way.
Yeah, it was. I wasn't sure if it was like the new speaker or if it was some kind of like streaming audio compression or just all the like background noise from outside. And then eventually, like, the instrumentation really kicked in. I go, oh, okay, no, that was a choice. Oh, that was a choice.
Quite a choice. You know, the fact that Kanye sampled this song for a single brings to mind another fact that we just kind of gloss over a lot of the time. I don't think we stop and appreciate. Which is that Kanye West listens to King Crimson.
See, I don't think that's that unexpected or special.
I find that delightful. I don't know. It's unexpected to me.
Well, Kanye West is definitely a self-declared genius, and as such, I think he subjects himself to a lot of genius stuff, and kind of forces himself into it. You know, speaking as a...
So you think maybe he listened to it and picked that sample, but didn't actually enjoy the record?
No, I think that he listened... I think that he heard that King Crimson is very difficult and sought out King Crimson because of its difficulty and then listened to it repeatedly and repeatedly and repeatedly and repeatedly until he appreciated it.
Okay. Because I just find it really... I just find the image really unexpectedly delightful. I mean, can you just picture Kanye West... You know, the Kanye West, thumbing through a milk carton full of LPs, thinking to himself, let me get into character here. Alas, what shall I listen to today? Did I nail it? I think I nailed it.
Yeah, that's that was unmistakably Kanye,
Yeah.
Duke of West.
Yes. Thinking that to himself and thumbs through these records and comes across King Crimson and thinks, yep, that's it. That's what I want to listen to. I don't know. Something about it feels somewhat incongruous even with the explanation that you just gave me, which, to your credit, makes perfect sense.
He's got a very wide base of influences. Like, he has listened and absorbed a lot of stuff.
That's true.
That's kind of his hallmark as a producer, that he draws
True.
from a very wide influence base.
True. And King Crimson are indeed influential.
Yeah. They have a bit of a reputation.
Don't they? Before we get into that, let's read a statement from Billy, who suggested this album.
Yeah, why did Billy suggest this album? I assume he likes it.
Put on my best Casey Kasem here. Billy has submitted a statement to us, and he writes, I grew up listening to punk. As a teenager, everything I read seemed to agree. 70s punk was a reaction to something called progressive rock, which by rock historian consensus was bloated, virtuosic, and defined by self-indulgence and flute solos. I got a little older. I started noticing something that didn't add up. Bands cited King Crimson, and this album in particular, as an influence. Like a lot of bands. What was I missing? I decided to give it a listen, and it absolutely killed. It was hard, it was gentle, it was raw, it was polished. It was sprawling, it was catchy, it was organic, and it was epic. It was undeniably progressive rock. And it was a clear and massive influence on so much of what I loved. Goth rock, metal, psych pop, and yes, even punk itself. It turned out the detractors of prog had been lying all along. At least, about everything but the flute solos.
Hey, those flute solos are awesome, okay?
Oh yeah. Got a thing about the flute solos.
I mean, look, I'm not all that into like 60s and 70s classic rock, which I know had a tendency to sort of lean on the flute aesthetic as a shorthand for innocence or purity.
Or for aqua lungs.
Yeah, sure. But yeah, I don't know. I never got tainted by that. I don't know. I dig a flute, judiciously used, but...
And I would agree that in this album it is used judiciously. So Harrison, before we dive into the meat of this album, just a quick question. So you mentioned you'd never heard this before, right?
No. Or at least I have no memory of it.
Okay. What were your preconceptions of King Crimson before diving into this? Did you know them by reputation?
So, I kind of half knew them by reputation and half knew them by experience. I just don't really remember anything about it. I remember at some point in high school, some friend of mine got really into King Crimson, and, you know, they were the kind of guy who, like, got super into Deep Purple and, you know, got super into whatever high concept thing. So that they were into King Crimson was kind of like a rolling my eyes moment. You know, oh, here we go, here's something else. And I think the first time he, like, showed it to us, it was like 5 of us packed into a cramped car with crappy car stereos and cigarette smoke and open windows and, you know, it just crosstalk and chatter. And I don't remember what I heard, I just remember that it was noise. That it was, like, just incomprehensible. It was a wall of just... interference. And I immediately rolled my eyes and was like, okay, don't care, this is bad. And mostly just wrote off King Crimson for the next several years because I knew they had a reputation for being kind of up their own butts, so to speak. And the only experience I'd had of them was like, yeah, no, I can see that. That makes sense.
Yeah.
That was sort of my concept of King Crimson prior to listening to this. So that was the preconceived notion I came in with. How about you?
For my part, I had listened to some King Crimson before. You know, they're a band that gets, like Billy said, they're a band that other bands tend to throw around as an influence a lot. And every once in a while I get a wild yen and decide to check out somebody whose name I've been hearing for ages and ages. I don't remember what King Crimson I put on it. I don't think it was this one, because there was stuff on this album that I'm confident I'd never heard before. This was probably after I did the iPod experiment on my beloved Google Plus, where people
Living on the
suggested
farm,
albums. Yeah, it's out there on the farm with the other social media networks. Nothing bad will ever happen to it over there. Not like in this cruel world.
Making good friends with Friendster. It's rolling in the grass with MySpace. Or MySpace that was, anyways. MySpace ran away, and then Mom brought back another dog and said it was MySpace, but it wasn't MySpace.
Anyway, so I had my friends submit music that was influential to them or that they were excited about that they wanted to share, and I cleared out my music library and wrote reviews of like 160 albums or something. 2 albums that I reviewed for this project within a very short time frame both had covers of the same King Crimson song, which was Red. So I think I probably checked out that album, which it was the title track of its own album, Red. I don't remember much from it, to be honest with you.
I cannot imagine what covering Red must be like, because it can't be simple.
I mean, it's very improvisatory. It's an instrumental song. It has an instrumental hook. And, it was recognizable, even though 2 different bands were doing interpretations of it. I was like, didn't I hear this just recently? And I looked back, and yeah, same title. So I looked it up, and written by Robert Fripp, and I was like, oh, that's the guy from King Crimson, isn't it? Oh, okay. So that was my experience with King Crimson to date.
I forgot to mention, I did have one other experience of King Crimson before listening to this.
Oh. Spill the dirt.
The arc villain for Golden Wind. And yes, I did just squeeze a JoJo reference into our podcast.
You are such a nerd.
Oh no, the tables have turned. That word is so hurtful.
So, with all that out of the way, let's do a little bit of biographical info about this album. It was King Crimson's first album. It was released in 1969 on Island Records. It was a follow-up to another album by a previous group that 2 of the band members had been a part of, Giles, and Fripp. I really like this story that I learned about doing research here. Peter and Michael Giles played the bass and the drums, and they put out an ad that they were looking for a musician who could play the organ and sing. And a man by the name of Robert Fripp answered the ad. Robert Fripp is a guitarist. He cannot play the organ. He cannot sing. But they hired him, and they formed the group Giles, and Fripp. And that's some serious upper-class white man energy right there, right?
I guess, but, other white people.
We need an organist who can sing. Hey, I saw your ad. Yeah, do you play the organ? No. Can you sing? Again, no. Well, you're hired then. Just something about that gets me.
Yeah.
So they put out an album as Giles, and Fripp. Then they had a couple of lineup changes. Robert Fripp brought in his friend Greg Lake to play the bass. He replaced Peter Giles. Greg Lake later went on to be a founding member of Emerson, Lake and Palmer. He brought in Peter Sinfield and Ian McDonald as well. So that rounded out the band.
Yeah, it's I'm still kind of confused as to how any A&R rep in their right mind in 1969 gives these guys a shot.
I don't know, man.
Because this album
it's unique.
This album is nonsense.
Yeah, in fact, to quote from Peter Sinfield, if it sounded at all popular, it was out. So it had to be complicated. It had to be more expansive chords. It had to have strange influences. If it sounded like too simple, we'd make it more complicated. We'd play it in 7/8 time or 5/8 time just to show off. And this, if you're concerned about how challenging King Crimson is supposed to be, this confirms your worst fears, right?
Yeah, and I mean, I have to admit, I kind of have to respect the ambition of that.
Oh yeah, totally. And this is just in terms of sonic textures, this is so unique, especially for its time. They take this blend of hard rock, psychedelic rock, folk music, classical, and jazz.
What would later come to be called modern jazz?
Yeah, Fripp was especially influenced by Miles Davis, if that makes this any clearer to you. Davis at the time was doing experiments in different modes instead of different keys, and was really in this phase of creating these like blocks of notes that would stand in place of where a trumpet would traditionally play something that we would more readily recognize as a melody. So it's a really strange blend, and like you said, it's kind of hard to picture given where music was in 1968. Kind of hard to picture anybody actually willing to give such an experimental group a shot. But they got their shot, and they put out this album that is unique in so many ways. Imagine being a record-buying member of the public in 1969, going to a record store and seeing this screaming face on the cover of the album. It doesn't even have a band name on it.
Yeah.
There's no text on the cover of this album, just this horrifying painting by Barry Godber, who died shortly after this album came out. So this is like his last and most famous work.
Robert Fripp, where were you the night that he died?
Mr. Fripp, if that is your real name. Anyway, so let's get into it. Harrison, what is the experience for you? You queue up In the Court of the Crimson King. You turn on side 1, track 1, 21st Century Schizoid Man. What is going through your head as you listen to this song?
I liked it. I liked it a lot. It constantly feels like it's on the edge of falling apart, and yet still holding itself together. It is this sublime balancing act. I don't know how it works, and I even remember kind of thinking, like, I don't know how to review this album. Like, I don't know how to review this music, because personally, I actually really do like this. But even if I didn't like it, I don't know how I could review it professionally, because I don't know how you get bored with this.
Yeah.
Like, it's constantly changing. It's constantly doing something different. No two movements seem the same. They have, like, just the slightest tenuous connection to one another.
Mm-hmm.
And if I was, like, a professional critic in 1969, you know, who's, like, grossly offended by this travesty against rock music, I don't know that I'd be able to say it's bad. Like, I don't know that I'd be able to say I didn't enjoy it.
There were contemporary critics who dared to criticize this album. Famous critic Robert Christgau of The Village Voice.
Robert Christgau hated this?
He called it, and I quote, ersatz shit.
What?
Merely a 2-word review just said shit sandwich.
Where'd they print that? Where'd they print that? That's not real, is it? You can't print that.
Robert Christgau has been on the cutting edge of almost every new movement in rock. He was one of the earliest, like, traditional critics to give hip-hop a fair shot. He hated this?
He gave it a D+.
Jesus. I usually, like,
and he wrote
guy.
again, and I quote, the plus is because Pete Townsend likes it. Beware the forthcoming hype. This is ersatz shit.
Wow.
Yeah.
He's the last of the old guard I would have expected to hate this.
And there you have it, man. So, that said, I really enjoyed 21st Century Schizoid Man. It is, in a lot of ways, it's kind of the most rock-like song on the album. It's got the crunchy guitars, and it's got a lot of bite because the horn section is doubling the guitar parts for a large part of it. They're doing that really cool riff where it's going ba-da-da-da-da-da.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that.
Yeah, that's great.
But they're not keeping
Michael
the same
Giles-
rhythm there.
What? Are they doing polyrhythms? I mean, I'm not
I think they're doing polyrhythms. It's kind of hard
having
to
listened to this
follow.
Yeah, I've listened to it like 4 times, and I don't know, man. I'm having a hard time wrapping my brain around what's going on in this song, but it never feels wrong.
Right.
And that's a real highlight of it. I also really, really love what Michael Giles is doing on the drums here. There's
I
a
kind
horn
of think he's the
breakdown.
rug that ties the room together.
This rug I have, it really tied the room together.
Yeah, it's possible. I mean, you could say that about him or McDonald or Fripp, to be honest with you.
Well, what I just
A
mean
lot of
is,
this is-
everybody's kind of doing their own thing, but the drums kind of seem to be holding everything together. Barely, but doing it.
Valiantly.
Yeah, valiantly is a very good way to put it.
I mean, during the horn breakdown, he's doing some amazing work. If you listen to, like, the cymbal bells, it's like a tingling sound that he's got on the cymbal bells. And then, late in the song, it's about 5 minutes and 20 seconds in, there's this breakdown where they all stop and then start up again at the same time, and they do these short breaks, and they're all completely in sync. They're all in the pocket. It is so good. It's just so satisfying to listen to.
It really
I love
is.
this song. Yeah.
It's weird because this album is exactly the kind of album I want us to be covering on Play Disc, because this is an album with songs that just kind of don't work outside of the context of the album they're on. And 21st Century Schizoid Man, I think, is the only one that actually works on its own.
I mean, it's
like,
one that you could
nowadays-
picture like on the radio.
Nowadays, the art of the album is kind of just gone.
It's dying. There are definitely artists out there who are still proud of being able to put together a full album and not just a bunch of singles.
Yeah.
But it's dying. It's a dying art, for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm still, I'm a cranky old grandpa. I very rarely listen to songs individually.
Mm-hmm.
Like, usually I load up an album and, if I'm particularly impatient, I'll just skip around the songs on the album. But, like, I don't pick songs, I pick albums.
Yep. I'm the same way. That's why we do this.
Yeah. And, this album is a perfect example of an album.
That's true. You couldn't even play... I mean, maybe you could play a side of this album on its own if you're short on time or something, but...
Right. But it's not even that long. The whole album's 45 minutes? Maybe I'm missing something about this whole vinyl stuff. Kept everything short and breezy.
That's definitely a fact of life, yeah. I mean, vinyl full albums had a hard limit.
Well,
if you
sort of hard.
Okay, it didn't have like a hard cap, but the point is if you wanted to get over about 45 minutes, you were going to sacrifice your audio quality.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe I'm too harsh on vinyl.
Yeah, and I'm not a vinyl snob or anything, but I do think... we talked about this in the Bowling for Soup episode. With that album, I said, if it had been released in the 70s, it would have been a double album, and then I stopped myself and said, actually, no, it wouldn't have been a double album. Their producer would have made them cut half the songs and released it as a single album.
There you go.
And that limitation forces some editorial decisions that make the form what it is, where you have to be really, really sure of your material if you want to make a double album.
Right.
And not only do you have to be really sure of it, but actually the people that sign your paychecks also have to be sure.
But yeah, this is just a single album.
Yeah, and it's a single album, and it's got a little bit of a strange structure. There are only 5 songs, and because of that, we're going to bring back that format that we did the first 2 episodes that didn't work out very well, where we're going to talk about each song individually. And it's 2 sides. There are 3 songs on the first side and 2 on the second. So the second song in the album and on side 1 is called I Talk to the Wind. And I thought this one was a little interesting because it's the only song on the album that does not either start or close a side.
Yeah, and it definitely feels like it's missing some power for that.
Yeah, and I don't think any of the songs on this album are bad per se, but I think this is the one whose classmates voted it most likely to get lost in the shuffle.
Yeah, it's kind of boring.
I don't know about boring. There's some really great judicious use of reed instruments and vocal harmonies. And there's also a really understated electric piano that plays just kind of in the treble range over the chorus. That's Ian MacDonald, who's handling all the keyboards, including prominent use of a mellotron, and also all of the woodwind instruments.
What is a
Tron. That. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, a lot of critics, if you read about this album, they cite the prominence of the mellotron. Although, again, I couldn't take my ears off the drums. The drums are really, really tying this whole album together. I can't believe, the way he's tripping on these snares, the virtuosity with which Michael Giles is just bouncing off the snares and toms. I cannot believe that he's never been on my radar of candidates for, like, best rock drummer ever. Because, this is...
Do you think he is the best rock drummer ever, or you just think he deserves to be in the conversation?
I think he deserves to be in the conversation, just on the basis of this one album. I don't know if I've ever listened to anything else he drummed for, to be honest with you, but it's so good. Good.
If I may digress for a moment, who do you think is the greatest drummer in the
John
world?
Bonham.
Seriously?
Yes.
Verify clearance level 8.
John Bonham rocks.
Wow, that came out fast.
Yup.
Really, John Bonham? That feels like such a basic answer coming from you. I don't disagree with it. I just expected you to say something less common.
Listen to Fool in the Rain and try to tell me otherwise.
Okay, no, yeah, you got a point there.
He was so good, man. He was so good with those ghost notes. He could balance just a slight shuffle and switch feels in the middle of a song. He also had a great ear for engineering. Like, he mic'd his own kit most of the time, which is why Zeppelin has this unique rhythm section sound.
It is amazing that you've never been a drummer.
I have tried, and I'm terrible at it.
Oh, okay, cool. I've always thought I was weird for that. Keeping different counts is so weird.
I used to think I could play piano that's coordinating 10 fingers. How hard could it be to coordinate 4 limbs? And the answer is very.
Yeah.
Very hard.
I've tried doing really basic drumming before. Not to learn any instrument. I can't do music at all. But I've just tried doing really basic riffs, and my arms just don't cooperate.
I'm okay on a djembe or some bongos or something. Hand percussion I'm okay with.
Sure.
But you put me on a full kit and I am at sea. I'm like a beached fish. Anyway, back to I Talk to the Wind.
Sorry.
Aside from... No, that's what the show's about, really. Our digressive energy.
Yeah.
Big digression energy.
God, I hope that doesn't get cut, but it probably will.
I'll keep it. I Talk to the Wind is one of 2 songs on this album that doesn't have a writing credit from Robert Fripp. And, I don't know, there's something about the lyrics...
It shows, kind of?
A little, yeah. I think there's something about the lyrics that doesn't hold up to the other 4 songs. Said the straight man to the late man. It feels a little sing-songy, if you ask me. In a way that the rest of the album doesn't. It feels less organic.
See, now this is a weird thing between you and me. I think growing up, you were the artist, the subjective one between the two of us, and I was the more.
Just sweet.
I was more of the objective. Art is useless. Math and science is everything. Yeah, I used to be one of those guys. I hate it too. And it's weird because your approach to music criticism, or at least to song criticism, is very mechanical, because you seem to be coming at it from how would I assemble these pieces rather than...
I thought you were going to save this part for when we started talking about Moonchild.
Well, we were, but then you just kind of started critiquing specific sing-songy words. And I don't know, it feels weird. Meanwhile, my take on this is a lot more subjective than yours. And I think it's just kind of funny. No, maybe not subjective, but more bigger picture. Because, what strikes me is kind of weird about the song, and why I think it sort of doesn't work as well compared to the rest of the album, is that it's not really about anything physical or concrete. To me, the song is basically about, he's talking about the wind, but it's God. He's talking about faith in God.
Yeah, and you mentioned that when we compared notes earlier today. And I was a little surprised because that interpretation had not even occurred to me.
It feels pretty obvious to me. Like, I'm not trying to claim any kind of, prime authority to say what the song is about, but,
No, I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just...
Yeah.
Like,
that seems pretty obvious to me.
That had blown right over my head.
And the rest of the songs are about, in as much as they're about anything, kind of real physical concepts. Sorry, theists. And, this is about a much more personal and subjective relationship.
Yeah, and I think it's that personal and subjective part that's really important because the rest of this album is, aside from being about quote-unquote real things, it's also very bombastic.
Yeah.
In a way that this song is not.
Like, one of my notes when I was listening to this was like, oh, so this is what Michael Stipe was reacting to.
Yeah. Anyway, from there we move on to Epitaph.
Ah, Epitaph. I really like this one. Hey, John, what's Epitaph about? It's about the bomb.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it like a lot of the songs on this album, the lyrics do just kind of become part of the picture, and they're not like I'm not absorbing what these are about.
Oh yeah, the lyrics have a very mural quality to them.
However,
it all just kind of flows, but
yeah,
this is about the bomb. It's not even subtle.
Yeah, I did see some interview material where I think it was Peter Sinfield was talking about how they were definitely concerned with things like U.S. military interventionism.
Yeah, a lot of people seem to say this entire album is about Vietnam, and I hardly think it's so specific. This coming from the guy who says this one song is definitely very specifically about the bomb.
I believe it, though. I really do. And especially because if you look at I don't know if this material is available in the LP, but our edition has this parenthetical of what the different movements within the songs are called, and one of them in Epitaph is called March for No Reason.
Huh.
So very anti-military in its messaging here. I have to admit, man, I liked Epitaph a lot. For some reason, I completely forgot to take notes on it, and I don't have a whole lot to say about it.
Really? It's a little bit weird because musically, sonically, it kind of sounds like it's coming more or less in that space perfectly between 21st Century Schizoid Man and In the Court of the Crimson King.
Yeah.
It kind of feels like it's the middle track on the album. Go figure.
Mm-hmm.
It's the closer before the closer.
Right. Well, the closer of side one.
Right. So it's kind of occupying a bunch of different weird roles, and I think it's also the most specific song on the album.
Yeah. Okay.
And also, ending side one on a song called Epitaph is kind of funny, I think.
Oh, sure.
Given that you got more to say after the epitaph, which that's not how epitaphs work.
Yeah, well, I can't deny that they picked the correct song for the actual closer. But we'll get there.
But yeah, the whole song seems to be really much occupied with this idea that, knowledge is dangerous. That, progress for progress' sake is not necessarily a good thing.
Become death, destroyer of worlds. Yeah.
I really wish people wouldn't treat that quote like it's badass, because it's not. That's kind of like people who are like, "Yeah, God is dead." I'm like, "Yeah, no, that wasn't a brag. That was
despair.
That was
a what have I done? That was a I've got blood on my hands."
Yeah.
Unless you have anything else on Epitaph, let's move over to Moonchild.
Oh boy, Moonchild.
This is the one where I was listening to it and I was like, this is the one we're going to be talking about. Okay, so my take on Moonchild.
Mm-hmm. First of all, do you know what Moonchild is?
The fourth song on this album.
It's a reference. It's an occult reference, actually.
I'm sure half this album is occult references, but go ahead.
It's Aleister Crowley.
Oh, okay. I guess I shouldn't be surprised.
Yeah.
The Crimson King is Beelzebub, so
right.
Sure.
Yeah, he wrote a book in the early 20th century called Moonchild. Which is basically the story about a baby with magical powers so strong she could destroy the world, among other things.
That's a Keter class object.
Right. Yeah. But, it kind of brings us back to that whole, no one man should have all that power kind of thing.
Or child.
It's almost like Power is actually just about this album. So yeah, Moonchild is a Crowley reference.
Okay. And it's a really melancholic folk song. And I mean folk like in an old English frolicking in the forest kind of way, not like in a Woody Guthrie talking about farmers kind of way. And one of my strongest impressions when I first heard Moonchild was, haven't I heard this somewhere before? And a few listens later, it did finally click with me. I'm a big fan of a 2000s British band called Doves.
Oh, yeah.
They have an album called The Last Broadcast, which features a song called M62 Song. And it straight up steals the melody from Moonchild.
Which melody?
It is the exact same. I'll give you a hint. It's not Surrey with a Fringe on Top, and it's not from the part in the middle that doesn't have a melody. They straight up lifted that melody and then just credited King Crimson as co-songwriters.
Which, that's a cool thing to do.
Yeah, I guess, if you can afford it.
You're right.
I didn't mind the sort of purple poetry in the lyrics for Moonchild, especially now that you tell me that the whole thing's a big reference to Aleister Crowley. I'm like, yeah, that tracks totally. 100%. I'm with it. I really like the milk white gown.
It's very Wicker Man-esque.
Yeah, a little bit. Now, the thing is, at about 3.5 minutes in, Moonchild becomes a very different kind of song. Mm-hmm. I want to be very gentle in how I approach
Song singular?
Song in quotation marks.
Oh, Jesus.
No, I'll walk that back, but I do want to be gentle in how I talk about this because I know I'm sensitive to the idea that me saying I don't like this will sound either like I'm closed off to the idea of like artsy music, or like I didn't like it just because I didn't immediately understand it.
Mm-hmm.
It goes moody. It goes very quiet. There are long sections where there are only a couple of notes played. It's largely improvised for about 8 minutes after the lyrical part of the song ends. Fripp is noodling on his guitar. Giles is just kind of, it seems like he's randomly rolling off toms in his kit. The band, which for 3.5 songs so far, has sounded very much together and very much in the pocket. On Moonchild sounds like they're just off in their own rooms doing their own thing now. And the most objective way I can put this is that it would be hard for you to convince me that every note in this section serves a purpose or is needed to advance the idea of the song.
And this feels so strange to be said by me. But not every note needs to justify its existence. And I'm pretty sure I'd be saying that even if I didn't like this, but I actually really like it for more or less the same reason. I am enthralled with the album by this point. It's got me hook, line, and sinker, and I can't wait to hear what happens next. Like,
even if what happens next is just
kind of, yeah. I mean, like,
okay.
I'll admit it, I got played, but I enjoyed it every second of it.
And that is your prerogative.
Yeah, like
I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying it was a real barrier for me to get into it.
Yeah, and it feels weird because I feel like I should be on the same page as you here. I feel like I should hate this for being indulgent and a waste of my time, but I don't feel like my time was wasted.
Okay. So
And it's weird because you were telling me that apparently there's like 2.5 minutes of this that's really contentious.
I don't know about contentious. There's a passage of this that Fripp himself doesn't like and actually used his executive producer privilege to cut from a remaster of the album later on. So I was doing some research to make sure that we got the original version. And indeed, it looks like we did. We got the full-length version. But there was a later version that had about 2.5 minutes cut from it.
And I sought that out.
Yeah, and it seems like the reason was not because he didn't like the music, but because during those 2.5 minutes, while he was improvising, he utilized a musical quotation from a Rodgers and Hammerstein tune, which was Surrey with a Fringe on Top from Oklahoma.
But yeah, it's weird because I ended up seeking out the edited version, and I guess I just imprinted onto the original version really, really hard because I could feel something missing from the later version. I couldn't tell you what it is, and in fact, I couldn't even tell you that it wasn't nothing. But it definitely felt emptier, even if what it was missing was effectively nothing.
That's a strange...
I wish I could explain
musical
it better.
trick.
Yeah. It's... and yeah, it was just... I probably shouldn't have liked it as much as I did, but I did, and I was tickled pink when you mentioned that there was a segment of Moonchild that you weren't fond of.
Yeah, and I think we've had the discussion that merited, so let's move on to the sort of title track, The Court of the Crimson King. I love the lyrics to The Court of the Crimson King. I think they're my favorite lyrics on this album. I love that there's this build of the vocal harmonies as the refrain, which is not a chorus, but it is a refrain at the end of each verse that kicks in. I've had that vocal line stuck in my head all day. It resolves so interestingly.
It's definitely really weird, and like I do love how that refrain just immediately drags your attention, kicking and screaming.
Yeah.
Because like the verses all kind of trail off in a weird way, you know. Like they really sink kind of low, and then it just yanks you right back.
Just like Moonchild, it goes after the vocal part of the song is over. There's a long instrumental section, but this one is full of bombast. It feels like the closing number to a musical or an opera. It feels very suitably climactic.
And it's weird because this is kind of the only one that has any kind of narrative to it.
Yeah, I mean Moonchild kind of does.
It's not much of a narrative, but like there's a lot of very specific imagery. Like this song makes me think of an epic poem.
Oh yeah.
Because there's a weird color motif running through the whole song. Like color is just very important in this song, and yeah,
color is important to King Crimson. Good to know.
Well, no, but I mean, like, there's the purple piper, there's the black queen, the gardener plants an evergreen. I mean, that might just be a pun. I don't know.
No, I mean, you're definitely pointing out something that is there.
Yeah. The yellow jester, like,
yeah.
If I wasn't pretty confident that I knew the tarot cards by now, I'd assume he's making some kind of like tarot theme. There's a line here I actually kind of want to highlight just because I think it's just such a perfect bit of imagery, you know, especially for our times. It's the beginning of the third verse. The gardener plants an evergreen whilst trampling on a flower.
Oh, that's so cool.
I know, right? I mean, those guys were really speaking to the concerns and the worries of their time. It's a good thing we've grown past. Crap.
Warfare and greed and jealousy. Our society has evolved beyond those petty concerns.
Oops.
Yeah, whoopsie.
But yeah, it makes me think of that whole, you know, when the best time to plant a tree is, right?
Yeah, the best time to plant a tree is 50 years ago. The second best time is today.
Right. That's really what it kind of makes me think of. There's also a certain rhythm to it. Maybe you could explain this better than I can. Because I assume it has something to do with the percussion. But there's this weird rhythm to it where it all feels very overwhelmingly inevitable. Like there's that bit as slowly turns the grinding wheel that feel like it just kind of makes me think of this like Fortuna's wheel continues turning on.
I mean, it's pretty in the grid. Giles has a few sections, especially near the end of the vocal section, where there are some drum fills, where I'm sort of playing it back in my head right now. I think he has some drum fills that put stresses in advance of the beat. Not many of them.
Right. Yeah, I don't know what it was, but there's just kind of this,
I don't think it has to do with that.
There's just this creeping inevitability to the song that I think is really cool.
That is really cool. There's also, after the vocal section is over, during the instrumental section, there's this great part where there's this building climax that's built on all artificial instruments. It's the mellotron that's playing the string section. There are various other instruments. You got Fripp's guitar, and you've got another part of the mellotron that's playing like a synthesized or electric piano type sound. And then it abruptly cuts into another section where the lead instrument is a real flute. And it's really
Billy,
cool because...
Billy, I don't care what the critics say. I don't care what you say. That flute solo is awesome. Yeah, I said it.
I liked it a lot, and I especially liked its placement where it came hot on the heels of a section where the instruments are all artificial and building to this climax, and then we get this quiet, like, opening a window kind of moment. It's a resolution of tension. I want to use the word relief, but that implies that what came before it was bad, which it wasn't. The other thing that's interesting about it is that the keyboard, the mellotron, the synths are played by Ian MacDonald, and the flute is also played by Ian MacDonald. He does a lot on this album.
Talking to himself.
Yeah, interrupting himself.
The way the fake instruments... the way the artificial instruments...
is appropriate.
Lead into being replaced by the real, authentic instrument. It kind of makes me think of that Twelfth Night effect.
Oh, yeah.
Twelfth Night being the Shakespeare play, where a woman disguises herself as a man and a man disguises herself as a woman. But the trick from the Elizabethan theater-goer perspective is that, all the women are played by men in Shakespeare plays. So when the woman disguising herself as a man takes off the man disguise, she appears more authentically as a woman. Like, it sells the illusion, even though it's still a man playing this woman.
For a more modern example, based in a piece of pop culture that we referenced earlier in this very episode, there's a great Venture Bros episode where Dr. Girlfriend, or Dr. Mrs. the Monarch, puts on a disguise where she's dressed up like this Brooklyn Beardo, as she says it. And Dr. Mrs. the Monarch, the whole joke is that she is a voluptuous female character who is played by a very gruff-voiced man. She sounds like this! But over several seasons of the show, you get to know her voice. And so when it comes out of a more stereotypically male body, as it does when she's wearing that disguise, it sounds wrong.
Even though it should sound perfectly right.
Bingo. 12th Night effect.
Right. So, yeah. It's weird because, I think that flute solo sounds better for replacing the fake instruments.
Yeah.
And it's not only is this instrument real, it feels more real.
Yeah. I think it was really cool. I really loved that effect. It was one of the more striking things about this song to me.
And since you brought up Venture Bros, I do have to point out. So, yeah, I've mentioned several times, I listen to a lot of this stuff when I'm riding my bike. There was a point when I was listening to this where, I'm on my bike, my cycling is kind of getting into the flow of the rhythm, and I'm, kind of fake drumming along with my hands, kind of trying to follow it. And it reminded me of this great episode of The Venture Bros where Doc is trying to get one of his kids, Dean, into the prog rock that, lights his mind aflame.
Hey, what's this one with the face?
Oh, that? Oh, no. You're not ready to step into the court of the Crimson King. This stage in your training, a album like that could turn you into an evil scientist.
But yeah, and then there's a part where Dean starts, trying to drum along, and Doc's like, oh no, don't do that, you'll strain your wrist.
No air drumming this time. Ruford can change the timing up so fast you could snap your wrist.
Yeah.
And that's what I thought about when I was doing that on my bike. So
that's what happened. Yeah, there's a lot of... Yeah, I was going to say, you were, listening to this while you were riding your bike. I hope it didn't cause any accidents.
No. But yeah, Doc Hammer, Jackson Public, keep on doing what you do, you glorious bastards.
This is officially a Venture Bros podcast now. Okay. So we're near the end. Harrison, what was your key track? The key track, by the way, for our listeners, Harrison and I independently choose one of the songs on the album that we think is key to the album, that we think is emblematic of the album or represents it in some way, using our own completely subjective criteria. Most important part is we don't share these with each other in advance. So we're surprising each other, and we're going to see if they line up. Harrison, what was your key track?
So I'll admit, it was really hard, because at first I only cut out 2 songs for consideration, which, was only 40%. But I was left with 3, and I didn't really fully know, but I think, God, ask me any other day, my answer will probably be different, but I think Epitaph is my key track, just because I am an absolute sucker for art that is about the bomb. That is a personal quirk of mine, I guess.
A perfectly respectable answer.
Yeah, and it's really good. It's hitting me kind of just perfectly right, at this point in my life anyways. And also, I was reasonably confident you weren't going to pick it.
You were correct. You were correct, because mine is the title track. I picked The Court of the Crimson King.
Man, I'm so happy.
Was that your second?
I thought you were going to pick 21st Century Schizoid Man, and then you were going to feel kind of self-conscious about doing that, and decided to audible to Court of the Crimson King.
So you seriously, game theoried my choice?
Yes. How did I do?
You apparently did very well. I will tell you that I never gave any serious consideration to picking 21st Century Schizoid Man, but it was a close second the entire time.
Oh, okay.
But for me, I knew from the end of my first listen that Court of the Crimson King was going to be it, and my mind never changed.
And it's really cool, because Court of the Crimson King, let's say you are a miserable cretin who can't appreciate good art like Moonchild. Court of the Crimson King would do a really good job of dragging you right back after that, because it is.
And it did. And it did.
So, well put together album there.
Very much so, yeah. I really, really liked it. Thank you so much, Billy, for making us listen to this. It was technically homework, I guess, but it didn't feel like it.
Yeah, after my first listen, not even after, during my first listen, the thing I was really possessed by the most was, why have I been avoiding these guys all these years?
Yeah, I had never managed to get into
right
them
up
myself,
my alley.
So, yeah. Anyway, did you have anything else to say about the album in general before we move on to the closing segment?
Not really. I was waiting for us to do the Did You Like It segment, but I kind of feel like we're just kind of skipping past that.
We don't... Yeah, I'm not doing that segment anymore. You can tell by the rest of the conversation what we thought.
Yeah, fair enough.
Billy Callis was the recommender of this album. It came up on the Playdisc Request Lottery. Now is the time in the episode where we would typically roll for the lottery, but we have a cross-promotion that is time-sensitive, so we're going to suspend the lottery for 1 week. It'll be back at the end of the next episode. Billy is one half of an electronic industrial duo that performs around Austin, Texas. They're called Nail House. You can find them on Instagram at nailhouse with 3 underscores after it. Nailhouse ____. You can also find Billy at Billy_Callis on Instagram.
How do you spell callus?
Oh, good point. It's BILLY _CALLIS. Billy_Callis.
So, John, what's on the docket for the next episode?
Yeah, since we're suspending the Playdisc Request Lottery, we're doing a crossover.
What is this? A crossover episode?
We do regular episodes every other Tuesday, and on the Tuesdays we don't publish, there's another podcast that we're awfully fond of called Pick a Disc, hosted by Matthew Latham. They are basically the British us, or, they came first, so we're the American them.
Mm-hmm.
Their format is Matthew always has a guest on. The guest picks an album, and they spend about an hour talking about it. So I was invited onto his show, and that episode is going to be published 1 week from the day that this episode is being published. So tune in next week to a different show to hear me talk about Dan Byrne and his debut self-titled album, Dan Byrne. And then, 1 more week after that, 2 weeks from this, come back to our show where we'll talk about Dan Byrne and his most recent album, 2019's Regent Street.
I can't wait.
Dan Byrne is a major point of contention between Harrison and me. It's one of the few musical subjects about which we disagree vehemently. So this promises to be a very interesting episode. You may have also noticed it's by far the most recent album we will have discussed. There are reasons for that, which we'll go into. But for the most part, I really like Dan Byrne. I'm looking forward to talking about him with you.
Yay!
Anyway, that'll do it for this week. If you made it this far, thank you for listening. I want to thank Billy Callis for suggesting King Crimson for today's episode. I also want to thank Ben Wright-Human for providing promotional art for us, including, starting this week, individual episode cover art. If you haven't checked out that art, go give it a look. We look great in straitjackets. You can find more of Ben's work at bwhcomics.com if you like. Ben is also a supporter of us on Patreon. Other supporters are Vita Porabil, Chase DeMonte, and Adam Herchak. We're very grateful for their support. And listeners, if you'd like to join them in supporting us and also receiving our gratitude, you can visit patreon.com/playdiscpodcast to make a monthly contribution. It's completely optional, but if you do donate, we will read your name at the end of each episode, and we'll give you access to benefits like an entry into our request lottery, having your voice added to our opening theme song chanting, "Play Disc!" and a library of bonus episodes in which Harrison and I discuss movies about music. If you want to get in touch with us, we're not hard to find. Our email address is playdiscpodcast@gmail.com. We're also on Facebook under the name Playdisc Podcast. We're on Twitter and Instagram as @playdiscpodcast. I hope you'll join us because in 2 weeks we're going to be talking about Dan Byrne. But until then... And now, a quick word on copyright. Today's episode used clips from several songs by King Crimson, namely Red, written by Robert Fripp, 21st Century Schizoid Man, Epitaph, and Moonchild, written by Fripp, Ian MacDonald, Greg Lake, Michael Giles, and Pete Sinfield, and I Talk to the Wind and In the Court of the Crimson King, written by MacDonald and Sinfield. The rights to the recordings of these songs are owned by Universal Music Group. We also used a clip from M62 song by Doves, written by Jez Williams, Jimmy Goodwin, Andy Williams, Fripp, MacDonald, Lake, Giles, and Sinfield, rights owned by Universal Music Group, and from Roundabout by Yes, written by John Anderson and Steve Howe, with rights owned by Warner Music Group. We've used these short clips for the purposes of commentary without formal licensing as allowed under Section 107 of the U.S. Copyright Act of 1976, also known as fair use. The Playdisc theme song was written and recorded by me under my stage name John Eric, and all other aspects of the Playdisc podcast are jointly owned by myself and Harrison Porabil, and licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution Share Alike 4.0 International License.